gets in the way.
Well, welcome back, folks. We've got another pre-summit interview with one of our top presenters, a personal friend of mine, a mentor, somebody that I really look up to. Honestly, I do. He always puts me in my place, my fuzzy thinking. I'm such a wacko, but he puts me in my place and tolerates my madness. I've got Morten Rand-Hendriksen, the lead trainer at LinkedIn Learning. We're going to be talking about his presentation on the second day. You can join us at the membershipsuccesssummit.com and watch the first day and the second day, so you can watch totally free some of the great thoughts that Morten's going to be expressing in his presentation. In this quick intro, I just want to give Morten an opportunity to say what are some of the key things that he hopes to communicate in his presentation, and then have a quick discussion about some of the key elements in it, and just have a broad discussion. It's always fantastic to talk to Morten. I never know where it's going to go, but it's always fascinating. So, Morten, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to those who are watching live and probably are watching afterwards?
My name is Morten. I am a senior staff instructor with LinkedIn Learning. And I make, I've spent the past 15 years educating people about web technologies and how to use the web to communicate with people, and how the web shapes us as people and as a society. And the talk I'm doing at your conference is in that realm, both what the internet is doing to us and what we want the internet, or more precisely the web, to do to us. Because I feel like we as a community don't really have conversations about the future. We let the future happen to us. And when we just let the future happen to us, the future is dictated by whoever creates the technologies we use. And we kind of just follow their lead. And that has brought us to where we are today, where surveillance capitalism is the ruling power of the world, where people have kind of lost faith in the platforms we use, yet are forced to use those platforms, and where online interactions have become reduced to just, how do I make money online in the quickest and easiest way possible with the minimal amount of work. So the presentation I'm doing will sort of be a counterpoint to a lot of the other stuff that's happening at your conference. And I think that is necessary.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah, we're having a change in schedule for the conference. There's a new keynote speaker at this time.
No, I understand. It was very nice of you to agree to help me with this summit. The only thing I slightly disagree with you, and I do understand why you've just said what you just said, but my conference, I can assure you, will have some elements of selling membership. But I honestly feel that this conference is about e-learning, and about e-learning individual entrepreneurs or small groups of entrepreneurs trying to build educational training material online and make a independent living, so they can pay their mortgage and make a business. And I'm a Christian socialist, but I've always worked for myself, and I've got nothing against people working, making wealth, building things, educating. And this is what this summit is about, to help advise, provide a resource that benefit, hopefully in the medium to long term, that obviously will benefit WP-Tonic, but also benefit the people that will come to this event.
Yeah, and that's my point, is that when we start thinking about how we want to use the web to build a future for ourselves and the people around us, instead of thinking about solely how do we use the web as it is today to gain advantage right now, we have a completely different conversation. Because what is happening now is, and this is not new. This has been happening for the entire time I've been working with the web. So I can date this back to like 2004. Technologies emerge, and then people start chasing them as if they're running after a train. And then whatever direction the train is going, you just have to go in that direction. And the breakneck speed at which the technology around us is evolving, and the money that's being poured into that technology to direct us as people into futures that benefit the people that already have power, is enormously powerful and enormously influential in what futures we're building for ourselves. The thing with the web, though, is that we actually have the power on the web to decide what the future should look like and how these technologies are going to be used. But to do that, we need to have conversations about what kind of future we're building, right? And what it's challenging for individuals to go into this conversation and say, hey, I don't like where this is headed. I'm going to build something myself that will be different, because then you'll be completely overshadowed by the big corporations and everyone who follows their lead. But if we as a community go and say, we don't collectively like where this is going, so we're going to carve our own path to the side that goes past where this big freight train is going, and saying, we don't actually want to follow you anymore. We want to create a new future for ourselves that looks different, that is more communal, that is more focused on our ability to grow as individuals while being part of a community, so that we help each other. And all these independent contractors who are working in the community are really part of that, but you can only truly be part of that if you understand that every time you choose the path that is laid out before you by a big platform, you are building the future that benefits that platform more than the future that benefits yourself. For example, yesterday there was huge news all over the internet, what I used to call blogosphere, which is now more like the TikTokosphere or the YouTubeosphere, right?
Whatever.
The creator community. There was big news in the creator community that YouTube is changing its revenue sharing model to make it so that creators get more share of the advertising profits from YouTube than they did before. And one of the things they're doing is they're monetizing the shorts. There's like the TikTok clone that YouTube has. And they're also doing things like allowing artists to load music up into YouTube that can then be used by other people, so that you can use like Drake or whatever as your music in videos. And then there's a revenue share model between the creator and the musician and YouTube, which sounds fantastic on the surface. But if you think about it, the revenue model for YouTube is just eyes on pages for as long as possible. That's how YouTube makes money. And the way YouTube makes sure there's eyes on pages for as long as possible is by putting each user into an echo chamber where the only thing that they're being presented is the kind of stuff they react to. And that is one of two things. It's either bias amplifying stuff. So you like this, therefore you will like this other thing, and then you'll slowly be brought into a more and more extreme version of it. Like if you want to see that, you just go look up metal jazz. That's my favorite example because it's very clear. If you look up metal jazz, this very specific music genre, and just let YouTube, the algorithm go, you'll end up in a place where you no longer recognize it as music. Every time, because it just makes it more and more extreme and tries to see like how far down this hole can I take you. The other alternative is it'll present you with things that makes you very angry, because that also keeps you engaged and keeps you watching and sharing and commenting, which leads to conspiracy theories and all this kind of stuff. And the key notion there is the intent of YouTube is not to make extreme content. It's not for creators to make extreme content. It's not for people to get addicted to YouTube. The only purpose YouTube has is to generate views, to generate ad revenue. So by buying into what YouTube is doing, you are tacitly saying, I want a future where every decision that is made is solely based on ad revenue and nothing else. And the algorithms should be aligned just to that. Whereas if you then go and say, there are other places I can host my videos. I will use YouTube for advertising, but I won't host my videos there. And I will instead say, when you come to my platform, you pay me. I get the revenue, and I pay some hosting company to host my videos. But you are not part of the surveillance capitalist system by watching my videos. So when you're watching my videos, you don't get tunneled into some crazy hole where you only get that kind of content, right?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that, because I practically agree with everything you've just outlined, but it is what it is with these type of platforms like YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, whatever they are. You live in the reality of your age, and you got to feed yourself and feed your family. So you've got to work with them to some degree, but you got to understand what you're dealing with, don't you? What is the purpose of these platforms? And
you have to talk, or we have to together talk about the future we want from the web, and what future we want to build, and how we make the web meaningful to us. That's why the title of my talk is, what is it? I don't remember that. It's like a web we have reason to value, right?
Yeah, that's it. A web.
We have to build a web we have reason to value, because if we leave it up to these big surveillance capitalist corporations, they will build a web they have reason to value, and we will just be pawns in their giant scheme to make money.
Right. Let's if I can put a question to you. You know, the two passions that I have, one of them you have, and I'm speaking for you, but I'm sure you'll put me right. You have got slightly disillusioned with one, but one, I presume that because you still are very active in the area, you still have a passion for, because you're a very intelligent man, so you could probably find some other way of making a living. So I presume that you still do this because you still have a passion for it. So the two things that I'm passionate about is e-learning and education. And the second thing is WordPress. Now, I know that the second thing you have become slightly disillusioned with, but I still engage with it for all the faults that I agree with you, and I totally understand your slight disillusionment. But the fundamental thing is it is open source. For all its faults, it is still, to some extent, still an open source project. And I don't want this particular interview to go down that particular road. That maybe we can have another discussion about that at some time. But that's why I did this summit, because it combines my two passions. So in the final quarter of 2022, can somebody build an educational course, an educational experience in a semi-ethical way and still make a reasonable living at it?
Of course, it just requires work. Just requires work, right? It's the simple, oversimplified answer is anyone can do that. Anyone can do anything on the internet if they want to. We are at a time and place in history where spinning up a business on the internet through the web platforms that are available to us is easier than ever. I mean, when I started building websites, to be able to build a website, I needed to understand CGI scripts, right? If you present that idea to people now, they'll be like, what the hell is a CGI script? It's not a thing anymore, right? I needed to understand not only how to write HTML and eventually CSS and eventually JavaScript, but how to transfer the files onto a server that I configured myself, and then point domains inside that server to the right location within that server, and then go to a search engine that was basically just an index and then register it so that it would get indexed at all because there were no web crawlers, and then communicate that information out. Today, if you want to make an e-learning service online that's video-based, you can spin up a website using WordPress or any other tool in about 5 minutes on any host you choose. And you can select the host based on whatever requirements you have, and no matter what host you choose, you can always migrate it somewhere else when need be, or you can scale it up to whatever service you need. You can host your videos on a myriad of different platforms. Some platforms that are surveillance capitalist platforms that put up your videos for free, some that are completely shielded. You can host your videos as files that you upload onto a server and then run through an edge host so that they present as a player on the front end. You can do anything you want. It's a matter of technical expertise. It's a question of how much time you want to spend managing your online assets versus how much time you want to spend actually creating the learning content. It's a question of how much you want to invest in the startup. But all things are possible. And as for earning money, it really comes down to finding a niche that you can excel in. This is like the classic music business idiom, right? First, best, or different. That's the key. You need to be the first to teach people about something so that you become associated with the thing, right? You have to be best at it so that when people see your content versus other content, they'll be like, well, this stuff is better. Or you have to be different enough that people turn to your content instead of other content in a competitive environment. Now, the challenge with having an environment that is this dynamic and where it's this easy to do things is if you do anything that's successful, other people will just do the same thing you're doing. And I'm not talking about the people that will like full on copy the stuff you're doing and just redo it or even republish your courses.
There's enough of those.
Some other platform under their own name, which happens to me all the time. But you have to immediately start setting up your competitive advantage in advance because there's going to be competition that steps into your space the second you become successful. And a lot of that comes down to building relationships with your audience so that your audience feels like you're talking to them and that you're listening to them and that you're not just some crappy teacher on the internet, but that you're a human being that really cares about their outcomes. And this comes down to that thing I was talking about, that what we're trying to do, like what we intended to do with the web, wasn't to make an advertising machine to program people to buy things. What we wanted to do with the internet was connect people to one another and allow people to have the capability of sharing their thoughts and ideas with everyone, regardless where they were in the world, as long as they had an internet connection, right? And we can still do that. We can still talk about a future where that's possible. It just requires that we carefully consider the decisions we make about where we host our materials, how we use the platform to reach people, that when we use corrosive tools like YouTube, like TikTok, like these other things, that we use them with care and with a strategic intent to, over time, shift power away from those platforms over to the individuals, right? So it's what I'll say is, if you're starting on this journey, you need to understand that you are not just a teacher online. You are carving a path into the future for other people. And you need to think carefully about what path you're creating for them. You're taking on an enormous responsibility that goes beyond teaching your subject matter into what happens when you teach your subject matter. What happens when you use the platforms you use? What happens when you do the things you do? And how do you influence the people who are watching you? Because once you become a popular teacher, people will take your word as law. So if you choose to use YouTube, you're telling people YouTube is the place to be for this. And that means everyone that comes after you will do the same thing. And then you're building up tremendous support for a very dangerous surveillance capitalist. And that's a choice you're making. And it might be a choice you're making now because it's the easiest, but you have to think long-term about this, right? So,
well, it's like any kind of social media platform. You live in the commercial world of what you find, but even if you really, the moral or whatever term you want to use, connected to a large part of this conversation, ethics, morality, things that seem to be a bit out of fashion to some extent. I'm sounding very old-fashioned, but what I mean by that, you have to understand, if it's just in pure business terms, you will be highly advised to get your own website, your own platform, and just utilize these platforms as a way of exposing your content to a large enough audience so you can then encourage them to go to your own platform. And if you don't do that, I think you're going to get into trouble at some stage, aren't you?
You're not going to get into trouble, but you're definitely not building a future for yourself and the people around you. You're building a future for large corporations.
Well, what
but
I
will
meant
say,
by
like, I will push back on one thing, and that is this notion that you should do it yourself is really dangerous. You should not be doing this yourself. You should have a team. You should actually, if I was going, like, if I quit my job today and I said, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it myself would be 10 people. It would be a team. I would go hire a bunch of people. I would have
but to kick back slightly, I totally agree with you. But what about if you're trying to build something and you just haven't got the initial financial resources to
then
do
you
that?
find other people that are trying to build something and they also don't have the financial resources to do it on their own. The reality is most people who start a business on their own and try to do it all themselves are so underwater when they start that they will never succeed. And it's because there's this notion of being your own boss is this weird ideological thing that exists very much in the North American psyche that doesn't actually line up with reality. The cost of running a business is enormous. I can tell you, like, I ran a corporation for a while. Just the overhead cost of legal work and accounting for the organization, irregardless of what we were doing, was around $8,000 a year. That means if we earned zero money, we did nothing the whole year. And I know this because the last year of our corporation, we didn't do anything. It was literally like we just forgot that we had a corporation and we did nothing. There was no money movement, and it cost us $8,000 to do nothing. The cost of running a business is very, very high. And this was a purely online business. There was no office. There was no technical overhead whatsoever. And when people then say, well, it doesn't cost me that much, then there's something you're doing that's not correct. You need an accountant if you're going to run a business. You need a lawyer if you're going to run a business. You have to have these things in order, right? And once you do, you realize that actually this stuff is very complicated. You need someone to do the sales for you. You need someone to do the marketing for you. You need someone to do the editing for you if you're going to do online editing. Because otherwise you'll spend 90% of your time doing editing.
Can I interrupt? I do understand. I do agree with a lot of what you just said, but I do also think there's methodologies, there's methods to keep your cost. I run a very tight ship. I'm recently doing a lot better financially, but it's not huge amounts of money. I just do this because of my dyslexia. And also, I want to be, as much as I can be, my own man, to have the delusion of some independence. It is totally delusionary because we, throughout our whole life, depend on our society, our parents, our community. The delusion that you're independent is that. But on the other hand, I don't really want to work for a large corporation.
No.
So that's why I do this, Morten. But I think there are methodologies that you can keep, using, having relationships, building relationships with freelancers, with subcontractors, being fair with them, being fussy about who you work with.
So that's what we used to do. We had a corporation, like we as my wife and I, we had a corporation, and then we took on projects, and then we hired in freelancers to do the actual fair bulk of the work. And they were effectively our employees because they only did work for us. And they had a standing contract with us. So we would pay them even if they weren't doing work at the moment, right? So they effectively had a job, but it was never like we employed them, because then you add a whole new level of legal responsibility and financial management and all that stuff, right? And the way we did it was simply by going, hey, we have all these people we know in the community who have these different skill sets, and they're all working as independent contractors and are all kind of always looking for work. But if we put them together in a room and say, you are a team, then you can pick exactly the right people to do all the important pieces. And everyone is doing what they want to. If everyone has the capability of stepping away and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. But there's a value in working together because you can do more when you're in a group than you can do as an individual. And then we can offer them services that wouldn't be available to them, like access to better healthcare plans, like access to accountant, like pre-approved tax returns, like all this stuff that would be extremely complex if you were doing it on your own. And what I think, like, the important thing is to understand running a business is a job in itself. When you run a business, you're suddenly not doing the thing you want to do. You're doing the job of running a business. And unless you hire someone to run the business for you, you're no longer doing the thing you want to do. Like all the people that go and say, I'm a web developer and I earn like $100 an hour doing web development, so I'm going to do that on my free time, are not realizing that when you earned $100 as a web developer at a company, they were paying the overhead. If you go out and you work freelance and you charge $100, you're earning $20 max, because the rest of it just goes to overhead. So suddenly you've taken an 80% pay cut and you think you're your own boss now.
I agree with the framing. I question the $80 costs, because maybe you should look at your cost base. But
no. Do the math. Actually sit down and do the math. It's astonishing how much money you spend on running a business. And it's like, because you have to start considering every single online subscription you use for Adobe and all the other tools you use, all the training you do, all the travel you do, the coffee you drink, the power you're using in your house when you are doing this stuff, the heating you're using, your computer, your equipment. Everything that you do is suddenly a cost. Whereas before, it was something that was in your house. Now it's a cost to your business, right? Because your livelihood is that. And that means if you stop doing the work, you can't pay for that stuff, right? So you're converting part of your house or your apartment or whatever it is into a business. That, all the cost of running that becomes part of your business overhead. All the stuff that you need to do that people don't do, like doing proper finances, like getting a lawyer to write up your contract, like getting a business license, like these things are ongoing costs, right? Paying for the software you use, actually no longer going on ripping off shit off the internet, but paying for the services you use, because you can actually be sued as an independent contractor and an independent business owner for using pirated software or things that you found on the internet. You're taking on that legal responsibility, which means you have to have an ironclad contract to protect you. I mean, the contract we had was 19 pages long. That did not include all the stuff we added for every single project we did.
Yeah, I agree with 80%. It's just, there's just a bit. I think I don't. People please don't get me wrong, because I do agree with what you're outlining, because I understand why you're painting this landscape, because there is a lot of counter-cultural, I would say propaganda. It's not quite the right word, but
mythology.
Yes, that's the better word. And you're just trying to counter that and draw a more realistic picture. So I understand. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to ask one or two questions that are slightly outside, but I just want to take the opportunity to ask you this. It might take another 5-10 minutes, and then we call it a day. You've been you're like me, you don't overstate it, but on the other hand, you've been reasonably open that you have dyslexia. Obviously, dyslexia is a spectrum condition. So what I mean by that, listeners and viewers, is that different individuals that have dyslexia can have it at different levels, and it's a complicated condition. So they have different difficulties maybe in processing. Generally, it's around short-term memory problems.
Mhm.
Now, you're a highly effective individual, and you strike me, and I'm not trying to build your ego here, but you strike me as a very deep and original thinker. How have you coped with your dyslexia? And I don't know how you would rate your level from low, medium to high around the condition, but on reflection, how have you coped with it so it hasn't affected your ability to do what you want to do? And have you also felt on reflection you've got some benefits from being dyslexic?
That last part is funny. So my dyslexia manifests in that I read very slowly. I like to tell people that I read at talking pace or read out loud pace. If you're reading to a child from a book, that's what it'll sound like, which my wife will contest because she has heard me read things out loud and it's painful to listen to because I make so many mistakes when I read out loud because the cognitive load of trying to read things and also controlling for the dyslexia is a lot. So like when I read to our son, he gets frustrated because he reads faster than me. He's 6 years old and he reads faster than me. So he'll sit next to me and read the book to the point where now I'm like, do you want me to read that to you? And he's like, no, you're too slow, which is extremely hurtful to me as a parent.
It comes across funny, but I understand.
It's not great, but it's true. I mean, and to me as a parent, there's with dyslexia, it's nothing is more what do you call tragicomic, like bittersweet than discovering that my 6-year-old doesn't have dyslexia, to the fact that I, as a 43-year-old, read slower than he does. Is like, okay, he's not going to have this problem, right? But it also illustrates how significant the problem is. And so it's that I read very slowly, I incorrectly read things, and I will often like jumble letters. So I have trouble, like I'll see a word just in a glance and then think it says something other, and then I'll ask someone, and they're like, what the hell are you talking about? That's not what it says.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's the strange thing, because I don't see jumbled letters. I'm more of an auditory dyslexic.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see any jumbled letters. But because like I say, it's a spectrum condition, and it affects,
manifests in different people in different ways. So you can imagine, like I tried to be an academic, which was enormously challenging because the academic system is based on the assumption that everyone can like voraciously and very rapidly read enormous volumes of content, right? So, for instance, for my I don't know how to translate this into the American system. Like when I was in the middle of my university years, I was doing this thing where I did a 6-month program where I had to write a thesis in 6 months, right? And for that, there was a minimum reading requirement of 5,000 pages.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Right? Yeah. And I'm like, there is no way in hell I will read 5,000 pages. It's just not going to happen under any circumstances. And keep in mind, this was in the 90s. Like today, I would have been able to, because I've figured out how to convert EPUB, like convert any book to an EPUB, and then use a reader to read the EPUB back to me as an audiobook. This is possible now thanks to technology, which means they have to break a bunch of intellectual property laws and whatever, but I pay for the book, so whatever. But it makes it possible for me to burn through books, right? But 5,000 pages was completely not realistic. So what I would do is list books in my readings list for the things I would write. I would then go to other people who had read the book before me and get them to tell me, either surmise what was in it, tell me which portions were relevant to what I was talking about, or actively add books that were so outside of relevance that they wouldn't be brought up. And I was caught in it. Like I actually wrote a paper, went in for an oral exam, and the examiner was like, you have a book on this list that is not relevant to what you did. I want you to tell me why you put that on the list, what part of it you read that made it irrelevant, and how you chose to put it there anyway, because you have to justify this. And it was plainly obvious to everyone I had not read the book, right? And I had to explain to him, I added it to the list because I needed to meet my numbers, and I have dyslexia, and there's no fucking way I'm going to read all this stuff. And he's like, well, I have to fail you because you lied. And I'm like, no, you are failing. If you're failing me, I will take this up with the university, and I will say that you're failing me because I have a disability, right? Your
Well, he is,
requirement
but
is
that attitude
unreasonable.
is what the
But
attitude I
think
got.
about this. This was in like 1997. Stating that dyslexia was a disability at that time was not received in any meaningful way as other than bullshit. The only reason I didn't fail that class was because my professor, who was supporting me through this, was like, it's irrelevant. Like, if you didn't know that he hadn't read the book, you would have given him this grade. So the fact that he didn't read this book is completely irrelevant. You just like stumbled on a reality. And then afterwards, like, he pulled me aside and he's like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you cannot lie like this. And I'm like, you made rules that I cannot follow. If you want me to be here and do these things, you have to acknowledge that not everyone can just burn through books like that. It's not possible.
Yeah, but
and I'm sure now, if I went back like 20, 30 years later, it would be possible.
Can I just say something? I think, can I just remark what you just said? I think for understandable reasons, but I'm sure you've looked back and you've realised this yourself. I'm sure, because you think a lot quicker than I do. I'm a plodder. I just plod along. You know, I just don't give up, for better or worse. But what I was going to say
we're
is,
all plodders, Jonathan.
Well,
let's admit it.
I'm a real plodder. Put it this way. I'm a real slow learner, but I get there in the end. You probably looked back. I think what I hate, because I would imagine they made you feel that you were going down a road, an individual road. But the truth was, they'd done this to loads of people.
Oh, yeah.
This was a well-trodden way of dealing with you and making you feel
exclusionary. The system is built, the academic system is built on hundreds of years of elitism and trying to just like only certain people get in. Only the people can afford the books. Only like go study medicine. The books cost over $1,000 for each book. Like, it's insane. There's no human reason why a book should be that expensive. Yet it is, because they can charge that much, right? Like the whole system is built around privileged gatekeeping, right? And one of the things is gatekeeping around disabilities. And it's only when disability accommodations are introduced into the system that people with disabilities who have the cognitive capacity to do amazing work are able to go into the system and do amazing work, right? And it's never because you're not actually suited for this. It's always because, oh, you have some form of otherness that is something that we haven't considered. So instead of saying maybe we should consider that, we say, no, you don't fit, right? And the reason I'm not an academic today is because when I was at university, there were no accommodations for my situation. And I realized as I was getting up to like, should I do a PhD? Should I really dive into this? That I would never be able to sustain it. I might be able to do it, but it would take me an enormously long time. And when I was done with it, what the hell was I supposed to do? Go back and become a professor and have to like do this for my living? Try to read things that I couldn't read, right? The whole system was rigged against me. And I cannot tell you how many regrets I have that I was not able to get where I wanted to go in my academic career. I also know that there was at the time no way I could do it. There's just no way, because the reading requirements and the lack of accommodations for people with something as trivial as a reading disability were too high. Like the threshold I needed to meet was unmeetable, right? And it still affects me today. I have a book project that I've been working on for years. The reason why it's not really manifesting is because for me to be able to write the book, I need to read an enormous amount of materials and then reference an enormous amount of materials. Yeah. And the time it takes to just consume that material, up until very recently when I discovered my hack, was too much. Like, be able to do all this reference sourcing is in itself so much work that I would never be able to finish, because
Yeah.
The
Can
system is not built for it, right?
Can I go into some of the strengths? Because I look back on my own, because basically I was always treated as an oddity, an outsider. Obviously, and I'm not saying this in a way at all, listeners and viewers, to brag. I was always seen as a very intelligent individual, but a very puzzling individual to my teachers and other people, because I couldn't give them what they were really looking, i.e. success. And I mean by success, me getting the kind of into the gold stars, whatever measurement that would show
whatever
that they
arbitrary thing they use to measure success.
Yeah, so they would get part of the glory. So that induced hostility, right? Well, it's quite natural in a way, isn't it? Things that we don't understand, we tend to get a little bit hostile about. So get back to it. So in my own thing, what educated me was Radio 4. And because it helped with my vocabulary, even though it suffers through my verbal dyslexia a little bit. And also audio books and Radio 4. That was my education to some degree. But what the strength it did, it always made me an independent thinker, because I wasn't exposed to some degree, I feel, is kind of propaganda. So I always were kind of slightly outside because of the resources that I was utilizing to educate myself. And the second strength is the books that I do read, because I couldn't access them through audiobooks because I had a real interest in the subject. I haven't got it now to such a degree, but when I was younger, I literally, not quite, but almost had a photographic memory. And if I really concentrated on a book and had to reread it and reread it and reread it, I literally knew every page, every concept. I really, really did understand that book. I could actually write passages back to you. I really understood it. So it gave me, I became a real expert. There's certain books now that I can't remember word to word, but I remember every concept of them. So there are kind of strengths to it, aren't there?
Yeah. It's also, like, for me, I learned over time to synthesize knowledge from other people, right? And when you rely on other people to give you to summaries of things, for example, you very quickly discover that if you ask 3 people who have all read the same book to give you a summary, they will give you 3 different stories. And when you start looking at that, you realize that there's an overhanging and an underlying story within that when you have these different interpretations of the same text, that means there's something to discuss about these different interpretations, and there's more to it. And I became very attuned to the fact that, like, the challenges around communication in general, which is why I was drawn to philosophy of language, because it's about how we understand each other and how language is a factor in our communication and whether communication can happen at all, etc. And that kind of thinking has led me to the work I do today, both as an educator and as a designer and as a developer. And I wouldn't end up doing this stuff if I didn't have this challenge put in front of me, because it wouldn't have exposed me to this liminal space between the created truth in written word and how people experience that.
Is that one of the reasons why you're still so passionate about e-learning and why you still work for LinkedIn Learning?
So I think for the reason why I'm interested in, like, the reason why I like teaching is because I like to synthesize information, right? And it's also because I I want to be the person I didn't have when I was teaching myself how to do these things, right? A lot of development work requires an enormous amount of technical insight into things, and acquiring that technical insight is challenging because it's often written by developers for developers on the assumption that you already know what you're talking about, and it's often you need to like put together pieces that seem disparate and not connected, but turn out to actually be connected in some very obtuse way that is hard to see. And having someone tie the pieces together and say, this is why things are the way they are, this is how they work, these are the ways that you can connect these two pieces that seem to not be fitting or make them fit, and this is how you can use it in your life to get to the goal you want to get to quicker. So I like to say that my job is to spend 6 months learning something to an expert level and then communicate it to you in a 2-hour course, so you don't have to spend 6 months getting to my level, right? That's my goal with every course I make. And the reason I work at LinkedIn Learning is because I have a platform unlike any other through LinkedIn Learning. Like I reach more people through LinkedIn Learning than I could with any other platform. And that's a privilege, right? I stumbled into it through Linda, then Linda got acquired by LinkedIn. That's why I'm there now. And we have an unrivaled platform with an unrivaled reach. And I see that every day in the people who contact me from all over the world to tell me that a course I created or a movie I created or a single code example within a movie I created solved the problem for them or got them a job or allowed them to change their career or led them on the path that eventually resulted in them starting their own business. Because that's what we do as educators, is we give people the capabilities to use to build the lives that are meaningful to them, right? We're not merely giving people a task or a skill, we're giving them a capability to do something in their life that they weren't previously able to do. And then we're allowing them to take that and do whatever they want with it and use it in an autonomous way, where we're not like saying, now that you have the skill, you can only do it in this particular context. We're saying you can do with this what you want and change it into whatever you want. And that's also why I'm gravitating towards open source, because open source doesn't put limits on you. You're not inside a walled garden. You're in an open field, and you can do things with it that no one has ever thought of before, or use the things people have thought of before in new and novel ways that fit with your needs.
Right. Just one final question, if you don't mind. This can be overemphasized because it's a bit like when somebody who is either semi or fully blind. Mm-hmm. It's kind of methodicized that they can hear things better than. So I think some of it probably is based on truth, but some of it is just mythology, because my dyslexic mind, I used to get very frustrated with people. I still do a little bit, or I get a little bit depressed. And what I mean by it, Morten, is that I see patterns. I say, well, if we do this thing and we do that thing and we do the other thing, we're going to get this outcome in the medium and long term. And if we do all these things together, it's so clear to me that it's going to be a great outcome. Or, if you take this bit, we take that bit, it's obvious that that's the solution. And I used to get very frustrated with customers or colleagues or people, and I kind of put this, and they just didn't get it. They just, what's going on?
I'm not sure that has to do with your dyslexia or just your contextual thinking. Right? I think a lot of people, people perceive the world differently, and people think about their actions and their existence in the world and how they interact with the world in very different ways, all the way from very immediate things only, all the way to very long-term things only, right? You have this huge spectrum. And our world, the way it is today and has been for decades, is very centered around the immediacy of things. You make decisions based on what you need right now, and you're not encouraged to think about the future, which is why I keep saying, we need to actually talk about what futures we want, because otherwise the future is something that happens to us. And I cannot stress that enough, because our entire society is built around this notion that you as an individual don't really have the power to control your own future. So the best you can do is just,
Oh,
run
that's a
behind the train
message. That's a
and
message that
chase.
that's a message that they send you
Yes.
24/7
And
every
it's
day.
because as long as the populace doesn't think that they have an influence over their own future, then the people in power can direct that future. And when I say the people in power, I don't mean some giant global conspiracy of aliens in, lizards
Lizard
in skins,
people.
or some crazy deep state MAGA bullshit. I'm talking about the big corporations who are earning money. That's the people in power. It's the huge corporations, the multinational corporations who are um, embedding themselves into our lives in a way that has become so invasive that it's basically the bedrock of society now, right? And this isn't something that is new. This is a history that started in 1200 or something like that, when mercantilism started. So we're just at a point now in history where we can actually see the immediate outcomes of these, because things are moving so rapidly that you can see a direct line from Facebook first entering onto the internet to where we are today. Right? Normally, that development would have taken hundreds of years and would have been very hard to see. But because things are so rapid, you can actually see the connections, and you can see, like, we made decisions back then that were bad because we didn't consider the long-term consequences, and the long-term consequences were like on a 5-year long-term consequence rather than a 100-year long-term consequence, right? But our way of thinking is everything has a 100-year long-term consequence. So we need to rethink the immediate future and what we want in the immediate future. But our society is built for us to not think about those things. And the way that that's done is by making us, like, I wrote a whole paper about this at university in the 90s that was called forced selfish. Like, I called it forced selfishness, which is we get into this position where there's so many threats around us in society, everything from the threat of losing your job, to the threat of losing access to healthcare if you're in the United States, to the threat of imminent war, right? In the 90s, there was always the threat of imminent war. Today, like, Vladimir Putin seems to want to nuke the entire world because he's angry. Like, there's always all these external threats. And as these external threats come and impose themselves on our lives, we start becoming more and more protective of just what is immediately in front of us and what we can immediately control. And that means, our immediate family, where we are physically in the world, what we can do to protect ourselves. And that erodes the societal trust, right? Because you start thinking, I need to protect myself just like my neighbor protects themselves. And in a crisis situation, they will come to me for what resources I have. And I need to protect my own resources. And that's how we land in, like, right-wing, conservative thinking leading to right-wing extremism, leading to the strongman dictatorship type rule, where the only way that we can get anywhere in society is if we, like, trust a godlike figure to know how to build a future that protects me as an individual at the cost of everyone else, because that's the only way I can protect myself. And then you get into, like, people voting against their best interest because they imagine a future in which they will have power. That's what the crypto community is cashing in on. They're going to all the disenfranchised and historically excluded communities and saying, hey, if you only buy the right tokens, in the future you will have power that will somehow be bestowed on you by the people who are currently in power, who will obviously not give away that power. So I don't know, there has to be more power somewhere that is going to magically appear. Like, none of this makes any sense, but we've been trained to think we are, as individuals, without power. And therefore, anyone that comes and says, actually, you can have power if you only attribute all that is wrong with the world to this particular class of people, or if you only subscribe to this strongman ideology, or if you only buy these crypto tokens, then suddenly that power becomes available to you. It's compelling, and it's anti-future, right? We need to start thinking about how to build communities and how to make those communities build the futures they want. And that starts with people going, I'm going to start a business. And when I say I'm going to start a business, I mean, I'm going to get a bunch of friends together and we're going to work together on starting a business so that we can each do the thing that we are best at, and we can work to the best of our capabilities and build something together that would be stronger and more effective than it would be if we were doing this individually.
So I think that's a great ending, but I just want to quickly comment. I think that's a great ending because the reality is, as human beings, our history of our species, we all have great individual strengths and things to give, or most of us do.
We all do. Everyone has
Well,
value.
certain
Everyone
people, I
has
would
something to
say,
contribute.
but most of us, put it that way. But the reality is, we are much more powerful, much more effective when we work together, don't we?
Yeah,
That's been
that's
this.
society. That's how we're not all dying in ditches of cholera at the age of 15, right? I mean,
That's yeah.
think about it this way. If you go
Everything.
back 300 years in time, we would be dead, you and I. We are too
Yeah,
old.
yeah.
People didn't live past 30. We are past expiry, right?
Well, I am. I'm way past
That's the
expiry,
point.
but
Like you don't have to go far back in history to realize how far we are. And the only reason we're here is because of society. The only reason we're here is because scientists invented vaccines and people trusted them, right? Now we're in this like recursive idiocy where people go, "Oh, I don't trust the scientists who saved us from pandemics. No masks for me. I'm not getting vaccinated." Like, what the fuck are you doing? You want to not have society? You want to go die in a ditch of cholera? That's fine. Then go die in a ditch of cholera. The rest of us will work together, right? And we need to like embrace that working together doesn't mean ascribe to some corporate reality where you have to
well,
belong
just
to
to finish
corporate.
off, that is the the legitimate discussion that's been going on for centuries, but
Uh-huh.
it is the legitimate. A lot of it isn't, but that is the legitimate duo between society, that we all we work together for the better good, but also what element of individual freedom does the group allow?
Mm-hmm.
And that contradiction and that ongoing debate, literally for is ongoing and probably will be to the end of humanity, that debate. Well, I think we're finished. Thank you so much, Morten. I knew this would go an interesting direction. It's always fascinating talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to the summit. Like I say, we got some fantastic speakers like Morten. We've got Rob Rowling, another fantastic individual. We got Pat Flynn, who I was so happy that he agreed to be our keynote speaker, because he has been commercially extremely effective, but also has done it in a gracious, semi-ethical way. So I'm really overjoyed at all the people that have agreed to be part of this summit, including yourself,
It'll be fun.
Morten. We're going to finish it now. Please join us on the 29th and the 30th. You can sign up for free and watch live, totally free. If you don't get some value from it, I will be amazed. We'll see you soon. Bye.